Hey there, Duke fans, and welcome to episode number 650 of the Duke Basketball Roundup. We have a couple of episodes coming to use. I'm just going to be up front. I'm Donald Wine. I'm going to be the host for both of these episodes as I hang out here in Seattle, Washington. I was at the Michigan-Washington game over the weekend. Jason Evans, as I bring Jason in, was on campus. And Jason, you did so much stuff that we have to break it up into two episodes. That's why we're doing this.
Yeah, no. Rather than doing, look, I think it probably would be around an hour and 15 minutes or so if we did all this in one episode. Yeah, we're gonna break them up a little bit because yeah, I had a just a packed. It was really only like 24 hours
Right.
in
Yeah.
Durham. Yeah. And not just, and folks, I'm gonna be giving you not just, the public stuff you saw, but a little behind the scenes, a little bit of some of the folks I met with and talked to. One of the gifts that we have, Donald, on this podcast is that I don't know, people think we're worth we're worth discussing things with. So I got to meet a few important characters, so to speak,
Yeah.
um, in Duke recruiting and Duke behind the scenes and stuff. Not going to give away everything, but
Mhm.
I got some intel. We'll be
Yeah.
talking about it.
Yeah, so what we're going to do on this particular episode, number 650, is we will break down Countdown to Craziness. We're going to talk a little bit about the football game that happened down in Atlanta last night. Jason was not at the football game, so no, he does not have a time turner
Right.
like they did in Harry Potter. He was not in two places at once, but we will
I
discuss
was on
that.
I was on an airplane, Donald.
He was on an airplane flying back to the game,
Yeah.
and the game was happening in the fourth quarter. But we will also, on 651, which will be in your feeds probably 12 hours or 15 hours after this one, we
Yeah.
will
Let's say
discuss.
lunchtime on Monday, probably
Yeah,
6:51 will
so
hit
if
the
you're
feed.
listening to this on Monday, just know that another episode is coming very, very soon. And that will discuss recruiting, and it will also discuss the Drivel for Victory over Cancer that Jason attended, as well as the open basketball practice that Jason attended. So, Jason, let's start with Countdown to Craziness, which is always one of the fun events of the year. Last Friday night was no exception. I want to start with this, Jason, because on the ACC Network Extra kind of feed that they had, they didn't give us a lot of the intros. They didn't give us a lot of the things, but I will say this: Stanley Borden, undefeated, sir.
He is the man.
Undefeated. I went to a Zed concert on Friday night, Jason, and I did not know that Countdown to Craziness would also give me a Zed concert via Stanley Borden on the piano, which I think is very, very cool. But again, talk about some of the intros because in unlike previous years, we didn't get a lot of the sense of the music that was played. I mean, we get bits and pieces, but it wasn't the full intros that we're used to seeing if you're there live.
Yeah, I don't know what's happened. I guess the players have decided that, this sort of isn't their thing anymore. But with both the men's and the women's team, like in the past, the dance that you would do, this was a whole thing.
Hmm.
And in fact, guys would talk about they were practicing and all this other kind of stuff. So for the women's team, there are a couple of the women who danced, couple really good. And it's worth noting that Aluchi Okananwa, I'm pronouncing her name wrong, I'm sure. One of the starters on the team, really good player on the women's basketball team, absolutely brought the house down. With her introduction, she did 3 backflips. I was
Yeah,
like,
I saw
it
that.
was like, wow. And the place was just exploded. And you mentioned, of course, Stanley Borden and his keyboard play. In the past, he has played a saxophone.
Hmm.
Stanley is a phenomenally talented kid. But for the most part, like none of the guys did any dancing at all. They came out, they sort of waved to the crowd a little bit, like, yeah, but, and maybe they jumped up on a table. But
Yes.
that was it. It was just very, very little in terms of them putting on a show. That's fine, by the way, because the show we're really all there to see is what they do when they have a basketball in their hands and when they're on the court. But it did feel different. Like it just wasn't quite as galvanizing, I guess, as it has been in the past. I will say one really cool thing, and I don't know how well they captured this on the broadcast. They had set up a whole like catwalk, gangplank for the
Yes.
team to come down from the stands. And when when you sort of saw the guys there and they were sort of silhouetted with a little bit of light behind them, that looked super cool.
So
That was really good.
so I saw pictures of that, right? Of course, Duke men's basketball, their social media is top tier, S tier.
Oh yeah,
And they were and
undefeated.
they and they were able to post that, but on the broadcast, you just got the wide top of the Crow's Nest Cameron feed, so you didn't get the angle of the guys being on the end line and coming out essentially out of the shadows onto the catwalk. So we didn't get that, but we saw them kind of walking down the little, ramp onto the floor. But again, just from that wide angle is what I saw.
Yeah, and the last thing I have sort of about the show, so to speak, of Countdown, everything did go off like clockwork, and it is a complicated thing to set up. And I want to give a shout out to Debbie Savarino, formerly Debbie Shashevsky, Coach K's daughter, who runs special events for the athletic department and specifically for basketball, and she ran Countdown. I was chatting with her. I was chatting with her. I was chatting with Mickey and a few other folks right before Countdown started. We had a nice conversation. They admit that they are at least beginning to listen to the pod a bit, which is very nice. I was introduced to them as the podcast guy, and they knew who I was, so that was very cool. But I was talking with Debbie a little bit. I'm not going to give away the name. I'm not going to say what player it was, but she said one of the players in this year's team came up to her and said, "What song should I pick?" And Debbie was like, "What do you mean? Whatever song you like, it's your choice." And he said, "I don't really listen to music." Like he just said, I play basketball. I don't listen to music." And so I'm not sure in the end, she didn't say whether she picked the song for him or like if his teammates helped him out. But this guy, this player on the Duke basketball team was completely clueless, had no idea what song to pick because music, not his thing.
That's funny. And especially when you could just go to Stanley Borden and it sounds like Stanley Borden can
Yeah,
just make some music on his own for you.
exactly.
Because he's that
Exactly.
talented. But no, I missed the kind of the dancing and stuff. But again, I think the introduction to the songs, which again didn't come out as well on the broadcast as it has in previous years. You know me, I'm the guy that would write down all the songs and be like, okay, he came out to this, he came out to that. It was hard to decipher
Yeah.
which songs were which. Of course, my musical brain was able to capture a few of them, but not all of them. I think, but again, Stanley Borden, undefeated, a international treasure, that man. So
No
at
question
least
about
we
it.
have that. So Jason, let's get into the actual gameplay because I thought it was very interesting. And the two teams, of course, were split up, and then there was a first half, essentially a first game, and then a
Yeah, it's
second
it's
game where
game one
guys,
and it's game one and game two, and they were very
yeah,
different games.
they're very
I've
different
broken down
games.
like the differences in those two games. I think it's very compelling.
Yeah, so just for people out there who weren't able to watch, I just want to break down who the rosters were for game one, and then we'll talk about game two in a second. But the blue team was Caleb Foster, Malik Brown, Conka Nipple, Darren Harris, and Mason Gillis. And then on the white team, you had Cooper Flagg, Isaiah Evans, Tyrese Proctor, Kamen Malawach, and Sion James. 20-17, white team wins, but I thought it was a very back and forth first game. And funny enough, Darren Harris, who after the game in the locker room admitted that he was very nervous to be in camera, which I think is a great, kind of cool, inside look. He said he was nervous, but he ended up, lighting up, 9 points over the two games. I thought was really good. But it's funny to me that Darren Harris was kind of shy in admitting that he was nervous. But this is what exactly what Countdown is about. Get the nerves out of the system, or at least know how they're going to feel like when you come into Cameron in a game that everyone is going to win. And you get to kind of endear yourself to the crowd. But as you said, Jason, the intros are one thing, but how you play is another. And I thought he showed pretty well in his first night in Cameron, despite his nerves.
Yeah, let me break down game one for you. In my opinion, and by the way, I had wonderful seats. I was front row, right behind the official scorer, courtesy of my buddy Bobby, who gets amazing Duke tickets and takes
Bobby's
me
the
with
man.
him. Bobby is unbelievable. I will never say a bad word about that man for the wonderful Duke tickets he gets me. And we had a great time sitting there together, literally in the front row, best seats in the house. I thought game one was the Sion James show. He
Hmm.
knocked down a couple threes. He had 4 steals and an absolute terror defending Caleb Foster. I was watching this very specifically. And first of all, the moment Sion walks on the court, you notice dude is like, he's not just jacked, he's got muscles on muscles. There's no one on this team. There are plenty of guys in this team who are strong and I'm sure do a great job in the weight room. There's no one on this team who's even in a zip code with Sion James in terms of the physicality of their body. And
Sion James looks like his biceps workout. Like that.
Yeah,
That's how you describe him.
exactly. And what I really specifically noticed, because he was guarding CFOS, and it's worth noting, you would think that Proctor and Caleb would match up against each other. No, in both scrimmages, Duke put Sion on the opposing point guard, and that's part of the story of these two scrimmages. It's easy to fall back on offense. I'm going to talk to you about defense. Sion James, when he was guarding Caleb Foster, he was forcing Caleb away from the basket. He was up there using his body, using his shoulder, using his arms and legs to push Caleb back, put constant, and like Caleb couldn't get around him. Caleb Foster had a terrible first game. He was 0 of 6 from the field. His entire team only shoots 31%. And the reason the white team won 20-17, it wasn't, by the way, not a pretty game. Each team had 4 turnovers in just 10 minutes of time. I mean, that's 8 total turnovers by those two teams is not, that's a big number. But I think a lot of it was the defense was way ahead of the offense. There were some nerves going on, and I really felt like Sion imposed himself on Caleb Foster, and that sort of dictated that, a little bit of a sloppier game, and a game that Sion's team ended up winning by a score of 20-17. It's worth noting that K2, Con Knipple, and Darren Harris, who, if you listen to the reports, have never missed a 3-pointer in practice. They combined to go 3 of 7 from 3. That's fine. It's fine. It's nothing. 3 of 7 is not bad. We'll take it, but it wasn't the sort of scorching shooting that we've heard a little bit about. And I wanted to mention Isaiah Evans, who I thought was the most aggressive offensive player for the white team,
I
the
agree.
team that won. He scored 8 points. Cooper Flagg had a couple drives into the lane, but missed both of his 3-pointers. Part of the story, I think, of all this stuff was that Cooper Flagg, I don't know whether it was deferring or he wasn't maybe as aggressive and as dominant as you might have expected in these 2 games. And I especially thought that was true perhaps in game number 1, but I think a ton of it is nerves. And the other thing to note before we get to game 2, Donald, I think everyone has to understand when you do a blue-white game, countdown to craziness, everybody knows everyone else's tendencies. You're
Right.
playing against guys that you've been playing against for months. They know
Mhm.
what you do well. If you call out a play, they know what that play is. And so, yeah, there's nerves. But the other thing is, it's never going to be pretty. It's never going to be flowy because everybody knows everything about everybody. And this is a defensive minded team. I think this Duke team is going to have, it certainly has some guys who are going to score big numbers. And I think this Duke team is going to put up offensive performance in lots of games that clearly can shoot. But the other thing about this Duke team is I think their identity is going to be defense, and good defense beats good offense. And I think we saw a lot of that in that first game where both teams couldn't shoot very well and where there were a lot of turnovers, a lot of steals and stuff like that.
And the hope is that this is the toughest opponent that they'll ever face this season, right? Is their own team. And again, knowing their tendencies, knowing how they play, it's great to see Sion James get into Caleb Foss's grill, like, get into his grill on defense because somebody else is going to do that down the line. And guess what? Foster will be ready for it. And I think that's the idea about some of these scrimmages that go on in practice, not just in the public eye, but behind closed doors, is getting uncomfortable and becoming comfortable with that so that whenever that discomfort presents itself down the line, you're ready for it. And as Carlos would say, you can handle the hard better. I think that is a mantra that this team is trying to focus on this season, particularly on the offensive end. And then on defense, Jason, I think defense is always going to make a game sloppy, right? That means you're doing
Absolutely.
fairly
Yeah.
well on defense. So I really like that the defense was present. And I think again, it might be something that the crazies, everyone at home that's watching, need to get used to, right? Some of these games are going to be sloppy because, hey, our offense might not be flowing as well, but our defense is going to make it a sloppy game. And I think that is what we're going to hang our hat on. And a lot of offense is going to be generated from the defense. And as we switch to game 2, Jason, I think that was even more present, right? There was a lot more defensive stops. There's some blocks in this second game, and those blocks turned into offense on the other end. I think one of the highlights was, Malik Brown doing a crazy block on one end, and then basically a pass later, it ends in the hands of Cooper Flagg, who has that reverse dunk on the
Yeah.
transition. So again, you're going to see a lot of that this season. That's what they want to do, is get a block on one end or get a huge defensive stop or a steal on one end, turn that into points on the offensive end.
Yeah. Game two. I don't want to. I want to seem like I'm saying that Sion James was the dominant player in these two games, but I am talking about him a lot. And look, folks who've listened to this podcast before know that I know Sion a little bit. I spent some time chatting with him, especially during the Dribble for Victory. I'll talk more about that on our other podcast. This is not favoritism. I this is me making observations, watching these guys play. So Sion switched onto Caleb Foster's team, and Sion was now guarding Tyrese Proctor, and Tyrese Proctor suddenly went 1 of 6 from the field. Remember, Sion forced Caleb Foster into an 0 for 6. He guarded Tyrese Proctor. Now Tyrese Proctor went 1 for 6, and Caleb went bonkers.
Went
Cephas,
five for
without
five.
Sion, without Sion guarding him, 5 of 5, hit a couple threes, including a banked in three, had some free throws, 14 points in 8.5 minutes of playing time. I'm going to repeat that. Cephas had 14 points in 8.5 minutes of playing time. The blue team wins 37-21. Remember, this is a 10-minute scrimmage, people. 37 points in 10 minutes. Donald, I did
And
the math. That's a 148-point pace.
I like it. I'll
That's
take it.
that's massive. That's huge.
And
Now,
I will say,
yeah,
Jason, even 37-21, it was like, with 2 or 3 minutes, not even under 3 minutes left, it was 25-9
yeah,
at one point. So it wasn't like there was a barrage in the last, minute and a half of playing time. But this was a very, calculated, some of these guys that switched between teams, I think is interesting. Sion James being one of them, but also, I'll just list the teams from the blue and white. For blue,
yeah.
you had Foster, Harris, Gillis, Malawach, James, Begovic, and Sheffield. On the white team, you had Flagg, Evans, Proctor, Brown, Knipple, Hubbard, and Borton. And of course, Hubbard and Borton didn't come in until the final minute or so of the game. So in essence, it was it's kind of a 5-man rotation there. But when you look at how the teams kind of sprinkled out, it felt like everyone opened up a little bit more. And I think also, Jason, game two is going to be a little bit more comfortable than game one because everyone is getting a little bit more used to the lights, a little bit more used to the cheers coming back and forth. They're getting used to Cameron a little bit. And so they were able to settle in. I thought from an offensive standpoint, the second game again had a lot more defense that turned into some really nice offense. And the bank was also open. I didn't know that the bank on campus stayed open so late on a Friday night, but it was definitely open in game two. A lot of guys were hitting banked in threes or threes that kind of, hit the soft iron of the rim and rolled in. Get used to those because I think, again, it's great to have that bank open when you need it. And it's great to know that how these rims and Cameron will handle some of the shots that you're taking because that's also going to put your teammates in a position to get the rebound where your opponent does not know those bounces.
Yeah, look, I mean, let's be clear. Cephas and Man Man both banked in 3-pointers. That's how you knew that things were going the blue team's way.
Mhm.
A pair of bank threes. Cephas's bank three was from the side, wasn't even just straight on. I was like, come on,
Tim
man.
Duncan would be proud.
I wanted to also talk about Man Man because in this game too, he had 7 points, 4 rebounds, 2 block shots, including one that I think he just like grabbed in midair. Like it
Yes.
was more of an interception than,
Yes.
than a block shot. Wow. I mean, come on.
I don't even
And
think he let it get to the, how some get above the rim and then they go
yeah,
up and get it. He was like, this is not even gonna get to rim level. I'm just gonna grab it.
yeah.
And like the ball went up and all of a sudden it was like even the camera kind of panned and stopped and like, where'd the ball go? Oh, man has it. It's going the other way.
Exactly. It's worth noting, by the way, in game two that after combining for 8 turnovers in the first game, the two teams cleaned it up a good bit more. There were just 2 turnovers in the second 10 minutes, which I like. That's good. Two would be a great number if you were only half the team, considering we were both teams. Two is a really good number. A couple other things I wanted to mention. Cooper Flagg to me was more aggressive in game two. He was hunting for scoring opportunities, ended up with 9 points, hit his first 3-pointer. I think that what I observed in the blue white is that Cooper's going to do most of his damage, like driving the ball to the basket and finishing in that lane. He didn't seem to be too interested in a lot of. I think he may have taken one like pull up jumper, but not a
It was the
lot of.
three. It was the
Yeah,
3-pointer.
well,
It
and
was the
he
pull up.
had 3 pointers as well. Yes, but
Hmm.
it feels like Cooper is able to get to the rim. And even though it's contested lots of time, he's trying to finish around there, and that's a good efficient place for him to be operating out of. I'm dying to see him against folks who aren't used to him. I mean, obviously, Malik Brown and the other people who are Mason Gillis, the guys who are guarding him for Duke are guys who know his game. And I think that his game could, yeah, there's some people who are I think a little frustrated at Cooper's overall performance. And my caution would be that first of all, he's not a guy who's going to put up big numbers all the time. He's someone who impacts the game a lot with sort of his gravity and his ability to be around the ball and and be a pest on defense and all kinds of stuff like that that isn't necessarily a big show up in the box score kind of thing. But I thought I liked Cooper's aggression in that second game. On the opposite side, Con Knipple went kind of invisible. Um, he just had one shot in the second game. And he missed it. For a guy that we had sort of, heard how much of a dominant scorer he was in neither of these games. His scoring wasn't that great. In fact, Donald, should I get to? I did a little combined stats. Do you want
Before we,
actually you do some stuff in game two first, and then I'll
yeah,
get to that.
before we do that, I did want to respond to a couple of things because there's two. The one thing that I mentioned earlier about Cooper Flag was his ability to get up and down the floor, and you mentioned that some people are frustrated with his performance. Again, at a countdown to craziness scrimmage where you're split up into two 10-minute teams, right? Like, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, do not overreact or overhype yourself to countdown to craziness. That is our job. We do that. But you don't have to do that because I think the one thing that people need to focus on, and we, in this show, we do a lot of analytics, we do a lot of stats, but everyone out there knows me. I'm a man of the eye test. And let me tell you about Cooper Flag. Cooper Flag, his fluidity is going to make him impossible to guard with a lot of teams this year because of the fact that yes, he may look so lackadaisical in a way, right? For lack of a better word, moving around the perimeter, getting the ball, and it seems like everything he was doing last night or on Friday night was kind of in half speed. Don't worry about that because the problem is you could tell in his mind he's calculating where the best place to be on the floor for him to exact the most damage. And sometimes it's going to be a pull up three. Sometimes it's going to be driving to the lane. Again, sometimes it's going to be on defense when he's doing a block. And if you noticed there was one block that he had that it was called for a goaltending. He blocked a shot. It was so high that he just landed and kind of stared out into space as if to say, the rest of the team doesn't need me on this. I have done my job. And the rest of the team is going to go down and get this basket until it was called back for goaltending. There's going to be a lot of times when you see how fluid that this man plays that you are going to understand kind of how he operates on the floor, and it's about getting to positions. I think Concanipple, a lot of his issues on Friday night, and I say issues in air quotes, is because, as you mentioned, Jason, these guys know where he wants to get on the floor. Other teams will not. Understand where he wants to go on the floor and use his YMCA dad game that we've kind of described him this summer to get to those positions. Cooper Flag is one of those guys who's going to get to his spot almost every single time. And when it comes down to the clutch, that's when we're going to really see the Cooper Flag come out, the competitive drive where you got to go, hey, give him the ball, get out of the way, because if he gets to his spot, it doesn't matter if he's going 1-on-5, he's going to figure out a way to make the right play. And that's what countdown is about. It's about learning how to make the right play in Cameron with your teammates in front of the public eye. Practice is one thing. Being in front of the public and doing that is wholly another. There's so many guys who are, the world's greatest player ever in practice, and then you never see them do anything in the game. This is about marrying those two kind of players together. Cooper Flag in practice is going to dominate. Cooper Flag in this game in the public is going to dominate. But don't be upset that you didn't see that on Friday night, because when we really need him, is starting on November 4th, going on through hopefully until the first Monday in April.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have no concerns about him at all. And in fact, now that I'm going to get to the combined stats, you're going to kind of go, oh wait, maybe Cooper Flag was better than I
Exactly.
thought.
That's why I was leading you to it. Go ahead.
Exactly. All right. So I think you can probably guess the leading scorer in the two combined games is Caleb Foster, who had 16 points, 5 of 11 shooting, 2 of 5 from 3-point range. He also had 4 assists and 0 turnovers. It is, again, as I noted, CFOS did almost all of that when he wasn't being guarded by Sion James. When he was being guarded by Sion, things did not work out as well. And look, one of the questions I think for Duke is going to be, I mean, yeah, Duke's bringing some good, strong defensive players. How well do our guys do when they're playing other teams that also have strong defensive players? I don't want to make an excuse. Oh, you're being guarded by Sion. Oh, you're being guarded by Malik Brown. That's an excuse because Duke will play defenders who are good defenders, and you need to succeed against anybody. But Caleb Foster, leading scorer in these two games. Donald, do you know who was the second leading scorer of all the Duke players in these two games?
Was it Evans?
Nice. Isaiah Evans, 15 points, 4 of 10 from the field, 3 of 7 on his 3-pointers. And look, I am not sure how big of a role Isaiah Evans plays for this team in major competitive games. If I had to guess, I think that Isaiah Evans is probably like the ninth man or so, and I really, we'll talk about this more on the other pod.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I suspect, like, if the ACC semifinals or championship game of the NCAA tournament was tomorrow, and you said to me Isaiah Evans, over under 3 minutes, I'm probably saying under. At least that's my feeling at the moment. That said, he is clearly someone who is, when he's in the game, is aggressive, looking for his shot. He's clearly someone who is capable of scoring in spurts, in bunches. I was impressed with not just his outside shooting is very good, but I was impressed with his ability to get to the basket. He has those long arms, and he was finishing, in the lane around the basket, attempting difficult shots, but making them with some degree of regularity. I thought Isaiah Evans looked really good. Do you want to get in on that, or should I just continue to go
Yeah,
down the
no,
stat line? Go ahead.
I was gonna say again, in Isaiah Evans is one of those guys we talk about all summer when we talk about where does he fit, right? As far as the minutes are concerned, is he a guy that has the production and the qualities to be a 20-minute a game player? Absolutely. Is he going to? Probably not, because that's just how many, skill guys there are on this team. But I do think, and again, I kind of joke as I go back to last year. Remember who the top dog in the Countdown of Craziness was, Jason? Christian Reeves, right?
Yep.
Like and we had so many people email us like, "Yo, is Christian Reeves going to get 20, 25 minutes a game this year?" That was not going to be the case. And it may not be the case for Isaiah Evans, but I do think what you find in him, and we've kind of heard this, right? Some guys may have said that John Shire is kind of in a position where some of these players, he can kind of go, hey, on any given night, let me throw this kid out here, see what he
See
can
what
do,
happens. Yeah.
and see what happens. If he goes on a tear, great. If he doesn't, hey, we tried it. It wasn't your night. All good. That might be Isaiah Evans's role this year, right? Come in a spurt and kind of go, hey, let's see what you got. And if he can rattle off some quick possessions or quick production, yeah, he'll stay in the game. But I also think that it's going to be for all of these guys. I think defense is going to be the key here. Defense is going to be what's going to kind of set some of these rotations up and what's going to keep people on the floor. And from Isaiah Evans, the offensive production is there. I think the one thing about him that we've all said that he needed to work on from when he was in high school till now is his defensive production. And if he can improve on defense, he's going to see the floor. And I think that's the same. That goes the same for everybody out there. It does not matter how many minutes you're out there. And I think some of these are going to be kind of done in a money ball aggregate type of deal, where one spot, as long as 20 minutes of production from our bench is going to be, X on defense, Y on offense, we're going to be okay. And any player could be a part of that. That's where Isaiah Evans could get in. But I think the offensive production that we saw from him on Friday night gives me a lot of great hope for his potential and him kind of growing into the player that he could obviously be one of the best players down the line. It may not be right now, but he has that potential, and you saw some of that on Friday night.
Right. Yeah. So as I continue down the combined stat list, Cooper Flagg was the third leading scorer. He had 13 points, 6 of 12 shooting, 1 of 3 from three. He had 3 rebounds and 3 assists. We already talked a bit about Cooper Flagg. Again, I think stats don't fully measure the way that he impacts the game.
And when you think about it, right, when we think about the best player on the team or the player who's going to take the most shots, we haven't done the stats game yet, but Cooper Flagg's in that conversation, right? To be the guy who's going to be leading points per
Yeah.
game,
Yeah.
leading shot taker. If he's shooting 50% and having the most shots, we're doing fine, right? Like he went 6 for 12. If he's going to take 12 shots and hit six of them, yeah, of course, we'd love that to be 11 or 12. But if he's going to hit 50 to 60% of his shots and he's doing it from all over the floor, that's a good sign for Duke. Because if he's doing that, that means, again, you're kind of opposition is kind of pushing themselves towards that guy to try and stop him. And it's going to open up the floor for so many other people.
Fourth leading scorer, Sion James, 10 points, 4 of 8 shooting. He had 3 rebounds. He had 4 steals. He had a block shot. Newsflash, Jason's going to tell you right now that I thought the best player in the scrimmage in the blue-white was Sion James. It's not a coincidence in my mind that his team was the winner of the first half, and then he switched teams, and his team was the winner of the second half. I just thought I thought he was outstanding. And, those stats, 4 steals, 1 block, I guess, but those stats don't even tell the story of the defense that I thought he played in these two contests. The fifth leading scorer was Darren Harris, 9 points, 4 of 8 shooting from the field, 1 of 4 from 3-point range. Would have loved for that to have been a little higher, but I mean, Darren Harris, I noticed Darren Harris and Isaiah Evans were pretty much matched up on each other the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
Those were, and there was some switching and such that went on, but not a lot involving them. And I think those two guys are, sort of, they're in this big battle to see sort of who's going to be the ninth man, who's going to be the designated maybe scorer off the bench kind of role. And Darren Harris, I thought, played nicely. I think that Isaiah Evans is probably still ahead of him, but 9 points in 20 minutes of play, you'll certainly take that from him. The next leading scorer was Con Knipple, who was better in the first game than the second game, no question about that. He ends up with 8 points on 3 of 6 shooting, 2 of 5 from 3-point range. He had 4 rebounds. Donald, what did you think of Con? I think he looked good in countdown, maybe not quite as good as some of the hype has been.
Yeah, and look, again, I'm not here to tell people to overreact to one scrimmage. That's, as I mentioned, that's our job. And I think if we're going to overreact to what we saw on Friday night, then yeah, the hype wasn't there. But I will also say this: old man YMCA dad game will present itself in any challenge, and it can weather through any storm. And if he has the kind of game that we have been hearing about, then he's going to be okay. So I reassure everybody out there that Colin Knipple, getting to your spot in basketball will open up so many doors, because if you're able to get to it, whether it's quickly or through just just the old fundamental game that you see at your local gym, if Colin Knipple can get to his spot, it seems like when he gets to his spot, he is lights out, whether that's beyond the three or whether that's in the 5 to 10 foot range. I think again on Friday night you have guys who know where his spot is, know how he tries to get to those spots, and they are trying to kind of press him a little bit, and that's good because that's going to make this team better. Because if he's able to adapt to certain pressures, then he'll be all right, and he'll get to his spot, and he's still going to get his points. We'll talk more about it in the open practice, but I wasn't concerned about what I saw from any of these guys, most especially Con Knipple. But if you were an overreaction type of person, I can understand if you kind of go, yo, what's up with this Con guy? I've heard all these things about him, and I didn't really see that line up on Friday night. But I assure people, don't be worried about him. I think he's going to be okay.
Yeah, and again, deep tease. My open practice notes. I will have some things to say about Con Knipple.
Right.
But in terms of the blue white countdown, next guy I want to talk about is Man Man, combined for 7 points, 8 rebounds, and 2 blocks in the 2 scrimmages. Man Man is a man, and I think his. There was some talk. There's some question like, oh, will he be the starter? Will Malik Brown be the starter? I think there's no question that Kamen Malawach will be the starter, and I think he probably plays sort of as many minutes as foul trouble will allow him to play at center. Donald, I just 7'2". I just can't even describe how big 7'2" is. He
I
stands
can.
next to,
I
yeah,
can. It's very big.
he stands next to Malik Brown and Patrick Ngongba, Stanley Borden, guys who are centers, and he's just bigger. He's just a lot bigger than them.
Mind you, Stanley Borden is 7'1". So like and
It doesn't look like it.
it doesn't look like it when he's standing next to Kama Malic. And I think, and this is just me speculating here, but he also stands and walks like a guy who's still growing, which is scary. That a 7'2" kid could possibly still grow into his body a little bit more, both width and height. Like, look, this kid could be 7'4" by the time we leave here. That's what it looks like to me, because a 7'2" guy is not supposed to stare down at a 7'1" guy the way that he can look down at Stanley Borden. That might be his listed height back in July before he went to the Olympics. But this kid might be still growing. And if he is, that all of that is starting to come together. And I think it's coming together a lot quicker than we expected, which is why it seems pretty likely that he's going to be one of those starters on night one.
Yeah, I think there's no question he's going to be a starter. I was very impressed with what I saw from him. He has good timing on his blocks. He gets off the floor super fast, really elevates a lot. I was, look, when we did our preview a few days ago, I said one of the things I was looking for was how much does Duke try to run some offense for man-man, and they really didn't, and that was disappointing. I'm hoping that that will come around as the season moves on and on a little bit more. I'm hoping that we'll see, more pick and roll lobs to him. We
But
we
you did have
could,
that one play. You did have one play where Caleb
yes,
Foster was able to dribble around. I guess he kind of drew a couple of players with him, and then was able to kind of see Malawach kind of flash to the basket and then be underneath all by himself. He does a great pass to him, and then my man, all he had to do was turn around and decide how hard he wanted to dunk the ball.
yes, but I'm hoping Duke is able to integrate him a little bit more, a little bit better. I think that that will come around. But his defense, his ability to scare the crap out of people in the lane is a big deal. And that's something that I enjoyed seeing from him. Last three guys I want to mention in terms of cumulative stats. Tyrese Proctor, 5 points on 1 of 7 shooting. He did have 4 assists, but Tyrese has had better days. Let's just put it that way. He was aggressive at times hunting for his shot. But you'd really hope that Tyrese would be a little bit better than 1 of 7 shooting. Mason Gillis, 5 points also on just 1 of 4 shooting. He did have 6 rebounds, so Mason did a pretty decent job on the boards. But I don't want to say invisible or anything like that, but you didn't notice him very, very much in the scrimmage. And then lastly, Malik Brown only had 4 points, 2 of 3 shooting. He had 5 rebounds, had a couple steals. Here's the thing I'll say about Malik. Like, dude, he gets his hands on balls, like the number of deflections, number of times he's in the right place on defense. This guy, you understand why this guy is considered a defensive savant. And I don't know that we're gonna. If you tell me is Malik Brown going to score in double figures this year in any game for Duke, I'm like, I'm not sure he will. You know, maybe once or twice, but he's not going to be a guy who's going to put up offensive numbers for you. But I think he's a guy who is a difference maker in terms of the defense, in terms of knowing where he's supposed to be, in terms of his versatility on defense. Despite a pretty pedestrian statistical line, I liked what I saw from Malik Brown, and it's worth noting that he jumped center against Kamen Malawach, and he managed to win one of those. I mean, like 6'9" against 7'2". I
He
would have
also
thought,
jumped.
no
He also
way.
jumped early twice. So
He
I
did
mean,
jump, yes,
hey,
but that's part of
use the game to your advantage.
he's savvy. My man
Yeah,
is savvy.
that's the word, savvy. It's a great word. No, I will say about Malik. You know, he has that tendency to get double figures. I mean, heck, he had 27 points against us last year in a Syracuse uniform, and that's kind of what tipped off people to kind of be like, Malik Brown, Duke, that'd be an interesting little combination right there. But I do think that him, Mason Gillis, are clearly going to be two of the glue guys of this team. They don't necessarily care about the stats. They don't necessarily need to be on the floor for 80 minutes a game. They just want to win. And they're clearly here
Yeah.
because they want to win and they want to. And Mason Gillis, he's been in a national championship game. He wants to get over that hump and he thinks that he can help this team do that. So they're here for leadership. They're here for that experience. And on defense, I think both of them are going to be pests. That's what we kind of want is a couple of guys that don't necessarily need to get 18 rebounds and 13 steals in 7 blocks a game. I think they want to be the guys who help this engine go, whether it's just a great stop on defense or forcing the other team into making a bad decision with the basketball where our team can go and go the other way and get some points. Let's take a quick break here, Jason. On the other side, we will discuss the football game that went down in Georgia while Jason was in Durham. First loss of the season. We'll talk about it after this.
At your job, do you ever have to deal with a nose roller? How about a snub pulley? Well, if you're installing a new conveyor belt system, dealing with the different components can sound like you're speaking a foreign language. Luckily, you've got a team ready to help. Grainger's technical product specialists are fluent in maintenance, repair, and operations. So whenever you want to talk shop, just reach out. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
All right, we are back and we shift our attention to the gridiron. And unfortunately, for the first time this season and the first time in the Manny Diaz era, we have to talk about a loss for the Duke football team. They go down to Atlanta to face the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets, and they lose 24-14. Again, the first loss of the season for Duke. They're 5-1, but again, there are some things that kind of, in my mind, kind of crept up on Duke, and we've been talking about them for a few weeks, and they kind of, reared its ugly head once again, and they were not able to overcome them as they have been in previous weeks. Jason, before I get to you, let me talk about a couple of the headlines that we got from John Grantland. And John Grantland's great about sending headlines both for basketball and especially for football. As you may recall, he's one of the people who asked us to do this segment for the football team, and we happily obliged because we love this game. We love this team. But he sent one that was supposed to be, I think, 3 different headlines, but I'm just going to sum it up as one because they fit together compared to what happened yesterday on the football field, not just at Duke, or I'm sorry, not just in Atlanta, but across the country. This is what we have from John Grantland. The Devils went down to Georgia and did not find a soul or game to steal. At least Vandy beat Bama. At least we had countdown to craziness. And I think when it comes to when I bring Jason in, Jason, the team had been talking about trying to improve the running game. And unfortunately, the running game kind of regressed back to its early season woes. But the other issue is that for the first time, I think this year, our defense really could not handle Georgia Tech's running game. And that was the difference in this ball game.
Yeah, look, it is often said football games are won and lost at the line, and Georgia Tech beat the Georgia Tech offensive line beat our defensive line, and the Georgia Tech defensive line beat our offensive line. There we go, Donald. We can wrap it up there.
Yep, that's our game.
I mean, look, Tech rushed for 245 yards. That's just a massive number. Duke only rushed for 74 yards in this game. We struggled all game to get into situations where we were, advantageous downs and stuff like that. Once again, we struggled on third down, just 3 of 11. The guys who had been performing for us, Star Thomas, who's been such a stud for Duke lately, 14 carries, 48 yards. That's just not gonna get it done for us. And I thought, the 24-14, the final score doesn't indicate how close it was. Duke was ahead in this game, 14-10.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that, even though we talked a little about the defense having struggles stopping the Georgia Tech run game, the defense did a nice job only giving up 10 points to Georgia Tech in the first half. Tech dominated early in this game, and then Duke had control for a little while, and then Tech took over sort of at the very, very end. But there two things that I would take away from this. One is This was yet another super close game decided in the fourth quarter. Duke has won all those games this year. To some extent, the law of averages and just, like game of inches kind of stuff says that at a certain point you don't win one of those games. And this was that game. And you just hope that, when Duke's in a tight one in the fourth quarter down the road, that it'll turn out differently. I also thought the game really turned on a couple key plays in the fourth quarter. One of which was when Duke was only down 17-14. We were down by 3 points. We had a fourth down and 4th and 1 deep in their territory, and Star Thomas slipped as he was approaching the line. Now, I wasn't in love with the call. We were in the shotgun. Star Thomas gets the ball pretty far behind the line. Tech was closing at least a little bit. I don't know that Star Thomas gets that first down, but if he doesn't slip, at least there's a chance. And that felt like a real backbreaker. And then Tech, I'm trying to remember the exact play. Tech, I think it was a 3rd and long that Tech had that they converted moments later, and it turned into a touchdown very quickly. And I was like, that's ball. Those two plays, two key plays, were the difference in this game. And if you reverse what happens on those plays, and it easily could have reversed, then this game flips on its head, and Duke is the winner and Georgia Tech is the loser. I do think it's worth noting that Duke was incredibly competitive, had a fourth quarter lead on a team that's considered pretty good in the ACC. Georgia Tech is absolutely a team that expects to be bowling, and a club that expects to compete with anybody in the ACC. And the fact that Duke is right in there with them on the road, and it's tough to win on the road. We saw that over the weekend for sure. That says to me that this Duke team will be competitive in virtually every game, if not every game they play in the ACC. That's all you can ask for. All you can ask for at this point.
There's a couple of plays on the positive side that I want to point out, but also a couple of plays or a couple of things that I thought were the difference in this game, things that we had been doing well all season that didn't come to fruition yesterday in Atlanta. On the positive side, Samir Hagan's 1 reception, a 65-yard touchdown catch. That was really good. I also thought Peyton Jones, who didn't run the ball well, but he had a hell of a kickoff return, 67 yards. They only kicked to him once. He ran it for 67 yards. They did not kick it to him again. So that you love that. You love to see that. It was very close.
Well coached team there, Georgia Tech.
Yeah,
they knew what they were doing.
Yeah. And so I thought those 2 individual plays stood out to me. But there was 2 things you mentioned that I think were the difference in this game. I believe, and people can check me on this. This was the second game this year where we had less than 10 tackles for loss. Again, you mentioned that the game is won or lost at the line, and our line just wasn't able to get through like they have been in previous games. The other thing, Georgia Tech scores 14 points in the fourth quarter. This is the first game this year that we allowed points in the fourth quarter. Usually the fourth quarter is ours. And on this occasion, they were able to take advantage. And again, 14 points in the fourth quarter was probably the backbreaker. If they again hold them to 7 points, it's a closer ball game, and we have a chance at the end to win it, kind of like we did against UNC. But still, 5-1. This team gets the bye this coming weekend, and then they have next Friday night a home date against Florida State, who Florida State is not the Florida State that we thought they were going to be. It's a very winnable game for Duke, and I believe that Manny Diaz will have a chance. And again, Manny Diaz does not like Florida State either. I know he coached there for a minute, but that's not where he wants to be. So I think that this is going to be a game that he's going to be up for, that this team is going to get up for. We really got to get that running game going, because that has been what has killed Florida State so far this year, is their inability in some occasions to stop the run. So if our run game can at least get 150 yards, that's going to open up so much more offense for the rest of the team.
Yeah, and I'll tell you that I think that probably Duke's going to be favored in that game over Florida State, which, if you thought about it in the preseason, you would have been like, oh, well, that's bonkers. There's just no way that that's going to happen. But I would guess, it might be a pick 'em or something like that, or, a low number. But I expect the computers at least would tell you that Duke is a better team than Florida State. They have really struggled this year. We'll get into that game much more when we're coming up on it. Florida State also has a bye this week, so both teams will be rested. Both teams will have a chance to reset a bit after a loss. Florida State lost to Clemson. They didn't get blown out. It wasn't like horrible, but they also like wasn't super competitive. Clemson was clearly the better team. And yeah, this Florida State club is really reeling.
Yeah, that was supposed to be the matchup between the top two teams in the ACC with playoff implications on the line, and there was none of that in that game against Clemson. So that gives you, as they say in the mantra, you're saying there's a chance. There's absolutely a chance that we can go and take it to Florida State, but we do need that rest. We do need that week and a half to kind of regroup ourselves.
Hey, let me ask you a quick question before we go, related to college football. So Alabama lost to Vanderbilt. It's being talked about as one of the big upsets in college football history.
Mm-hmm.
There was a time, like I don't know, a year ago,
Yeah,
when that would have disqualified Alabama for the playoffs. You would have been like, nope, you're done. Yeah, you have a nice win over Georgia. Great win, Alabama, over Georgia at home. Great win, Bama. But you lost to Vandy, you're probably not going to make the playoff. Now, like, does that game even matter? I guess it
it's a
matters.
great question.
It matters for seeding. How do you feel about that? I'm kind of okay with it because I feel like the expanded playoff I think is going to be a lot more fun.
Mhm.
And I think like a year ago we saw Georgia excluded from the playoff. Georgia did not make the playoff even though they were undefeated in the regular season and they lost a close SEC championship game to Alabama. Like one loss in a neutral stadium to one team and you're like, "Nope, out of here. Forget it. You're done."
Florida State was undefeated the whole year. It was in the top four the whole year until
Yeah.
they weren't, right? So
I mean,
I
crazy.
like this. I first of all, that game incredible for Vandy. The scenes of
Yeah,
them
wow.
taking the goalpost down Broadway and throwing it into the
They
Cumberland
marched it for
River.
like a couple miles.
Yeah, they went through the the honky tonk district on Broadway, and then they threw the goalpost into the Cumberland River. Probably shouldn't have done that. We don't don't litter.
So
But
but
I
wait,
thought
I
that was
heard
funny.
supposedly it has been fished out, like the Coast Guard or someone got it
Yeah.
out, and there's lots of talk that they're gonna like cut it up into little pieces and sell it as a fundraiser. Man, if I was a Vandy grad, that is you can't not have that as a souvenir.
Jason, I have a piece of the goalpost from when Duke beat Georgia Tech for their first ACC win in like 7 years. When I was in school, we took it to main quad and we cut it up ourselves. We didn't have to wait for the fundraiser. We just
Nice.
cut it up. Shout out to Navy ROTC there, who had the buzz saws on hand to make that happen. But I will say, all of these games, all of these upsets, right? I was here in Seattle. Michigan, got upset by Washington. Tennessee got upset.
Your Miami Hurricanes
Miami
almost went
Hurricanes
down to
almost did.
Cal.
If you stayed up for that
Miraculous
game,
comeback.
if you stayed up for that game on the East Coast, congratulations. You saw 3 a.m. because that's when that game ended. But yes, there is a lot of really quality upsets in college football yesterday. Missouri got absolutely pummeled by A&M. I don't necessarily know that I like that, but I will say this. All of that means is this is kind of a jockeying for seeding. And sure, at the end of the day, it's still determined by humans. And I think the one thing is the SEC and the Big Ten are going to have these slip ups and they're still going to have shots to get in. It's the ACC that has to continue to beat other teams, not just within the conference, but outside of the conference to
Yeah.
show that the conference is better than the Big 12, better than, some of the group of five, better than some of these SEC teams that are being considered. Because that is the only way you get more than one team in this playoff. Because as of right now, it's basically set up to be SEC and Big Ten are going to get several teams in. ACC maybe one, Big Ten maybe one, or I'm sorry, Big 12 maybe one, and then the group of five, one of those teams, and the rest of it's just going to be a SEC Big Ten show. The ACC's job is to spoil that party, and to do that, you have to continue to beat teams outside of the conference and prove that this conference has some really good teams. I think on the whole, we've kind of done that, right? We've talked about some of the good games that some of these teams in the conference has had, Duke included, in beating some of the Power Four schools. They just need to continue that. And because of last night, I don't think the Vandy upset really hurts Alabama as much because all the other teams got upset. And so you can kind of say, hey, the
Great
SEC is
point.
a really good conference. So if it was just the one singular one, you kind of think about it more. But you kind of think about Vandy beating Alabama in reference to everything else that happened yesterday, which was kind of a reset of the grid in college football. But we'll see what happens. Of course, the playoff is going to be what we focus on more and more as we get closer to December and closer to the end of the season. But Jason, let's wrap it here on episode 650 of the DBR podcast. Again, we will be back in your feeds very, very soon. If you are listening to this on Sunday, it will be around Monday, around lunchtime. You will get episode 651. So go check that out. But until then, Jason and I got to regroup. We're going to resettle, and we're going to get ready to record the next podcast. So until then, for Jason, I am Donald. This has been DBR Podcast episode number 650. And now it is time for the Duke Band to play us out and take us home.